Fast X, we now have 11 films inside the Fast and Furious franchise, so finally I decided to rank all of them because I have been a longtime fan of the franchise since the very beginning back in 2001, and it has definitely been a wild ride experiencing all these films as they've released. We started off very humble beginnings with that first film. Now with Fast X, we're just getting crazier and crazier pretty much each and every installment, where it's one of the biggest action franchises around. Of course, this is just my personal ranking of the franchise. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different rankings, so make sure you share those in the comment section down below. We only are talking about the films here, not the television series on Netflix or the video game that came out a couple years back. But without further ado though, let's strap in and get to my last place pick. In last place, I have the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. Even after all these years rewatching the film over and over, I never thought the film was necessarily horrible by any means, but I never really enjoyed it all that much either, especially compared to a lot of the other entries in the franchise. I've always felt bad about that because this entry has always stuck out to me as the oddball of the Fast and Furious franchise, since it is a story that's central focus is around a new cast and their street racing escapades. It is still mildly fun, but it lacks a lot of the ingredients that we do come to for these Fast and Furious films, but I can definitely see why there are a lot of fans of this entry. At number 10, I have Fast and Furious. Over the years, this is kind of one of those sequels that I think is more forgettable. I've liked it less and less every time I've rewatched it. I, of course, was intrigued by how we reassembled the family here, Brian, Dom, and everyone else for this story, this revenge mission. It's just at the core of this, I don't think the formula here was perfected just yet. The plot overall in this does feel very rushed. Certain plot elements here, like the mystery angles, ending up feeling very overly convoluted. At the very least, it does set up the family aspect, but largely, like I said, it's one of those sequels that I think are, for the most part, are kind of forgettable. At number 9, I have The Fate of the Furious. After Furious 7 felt like a great send-off for Brian and these characters, I had a feeling the formula overall would be pretty different for the upcoming 8th entry, but having Dom be one of the central antagonists definitely is a contender for one of the most out there ideas they probably ever had. While this entry is a bit all over the place structurally and how it blends together action set pieces and its incorporation of its dramatic elements, it still is fun with how insane the stunts become in this entry. Overall, the team dynamic does feel a little bit wonky in this entry, given that Brian is gone and Dom is one of the villains of the film. So amongst everyone here, I think the major standouts of the cast are Hobbs and Shaw, who are excellent in scene stealing every time they're on screen, and of course they get a spin-off because of how great they were in this. At number 8, I have F9, The Fast Saga. This entry is one that I am very mixed upon. Obviously at this point you expect the insane over-the-top action spectacle going into each entry, and it delivers exactly that. Possibly this entry is most insane out of every installment up to this point. We're talking launching cars into space, swinging cars across islands. They're basically gods at this point, and when it comes to an entertainment level, it's a blast. While I'm usually not going into these for the story aspects, I think the story here is one of the more messy ones. All the exposition surrounding Dom and John Cena being his brother that we never knew about, which is pretty absurd since Dom's whole thing is about family, but he has a secret brother we didn't know about until the 9th entry, and all the different subplots. Just not a big fan of the story here, but when it comes to just pure popcorn level, I think this film excels. At number 7, I have Too Fast, Too Furious. This sequel is one that I always love revisiting whenever I rewatch the franchise. This feels like the beginning of what made the Fast and Furious franchise so successful, the beginning of the formula, just pure fun, over-the-top scenarios while still embracing the street racing elements and providing great moments for these characters. Brian and Roman in particular have this great, interesting dynamic that I have a blast with, and it's one of the few entries that we get to see a lot of character development and an arc for Roman, which as we see as the franchise goes on, we don't get a whole lot of that, but he is still a very prominent member, more so in this than a lot of the other later sequels. At number 6, I have Hobbs and Shaw. After how fantastic both The Rock and Jason Statham were in The Fate of the Furious, they continue to be just as fantastic in this spin-off of the franchise. Their chemistry here, along with Vanessa Kirby's character, continue to be a massive spark of entertainment, navigating through usual crazy action set pieces. Some of the ones in here I think maybe are just as crazy or maybe even crazier than the usual standard Fast and Furious franchise because it embraces the goofiness factor. We absolutely aren't going for realism here when Idris Elba's character, the antagonist of the film, is basically a Terminator at this point. He's cybernetically enhanced. It's silly, it's campy, it's so much fun, and I honestly am waiting for a Hobbs and Shaw 2 that we have not gotten yet still to this day. At number 5, I have Fast X, the most recent Fast and Furious film I felt at least was so much fun. It works quite well as the part 1 to an inevitable conclusion to the Fast saga. It's fun, it's over the top, the action sequences here are tremendous, but the big shining beacon I think for this film is Jason Momoa as the villain. Dante Reyes, I think at least, is probably one of the most enjoyable villains the franchise has ever seen. He's twisted, sadistic, makes for a fantastic foil for Dominic Toretto and the family, while we also weave in some interesting elements from the Fast 5 plotline. After everything that was set up in Fast X, along with that cliffhanger ending, I cannot wait to see where the story goes next in the next installment. At number 4, I have The Fast and the Furious. Even after all these years, it's kind of fun to revisit the very first film, the original, because in comparison to the later on sequels, it is just so much more simple and focused around stuff like street racing. But even as fantastical as the sequels would become in the series, I still quite enjoyed the very first film. It's much smaller in scale storytelling-wise, having this undercover agent infiltrate a group of street racers doing heists. It's just a fun concept at large. Then on top of it, adding some pretty great characters to propel the story forward, it's a lot of fun. The cool cars, the races, the stunt work, everything after all these years I think holds up surprisingly well for how long ago this film was made. And who knew, watching this film 2 decades ago, we would be at this point in time. 11 films deep into the series, and they're pretty much getting almost more and more crazy each and every time. At number 3, I have Fast and Furious 6. While the previous film shifted this franchise into a brand new gear as far as over-the-top absurd action, this film still hasn't quite gone off the deep end yet as far as that. I think there is much more of a balance here, and I kind of like that about this entry. Out of all the Fast and Furious films, 6 has one of my favorite climaxes of the franchise, but the overall action here is intense. Various hand-to-hand fight sequences, souped-up cars, tank chases. Somehow Letty has returned, but now she has no memory, but she's a villain now. Stuff like exactly that is what I mean. As the sequels went on, they got a little bit more soap opera-y with their big reveals, but 6 doesn't really have that problem as much. We are kind of beginning towards that becoming an issue later on, but I have a blast with Fast and Furious 6. At number 2, I have Furious 7. Despite all the somber circumstances surrounding Furious 7, I do think it is a fantastic film all around, and part of what elevates it for me is the direction. James Wan, I felt, was able to deliver a lot of unique visual stylings that you don't get a lot of from most entries in the Fast and Furious franchise. And seeing as we come to these films with the big action spectacle, the over-the-top fight sequences, the car chases, all that stuff, that visual flair, I think, does really enhance the experience all around. And these giant, over-the-top LA-based battles, parachuting cars. Furious 7 also has one of my favorite logic-defying moments in the entire franchise when Dom and Deckard fight and Vin Diesel creates this massive hole in the bridge, since Vin Diesel and Jason Statham both contractually aren't allowed to lose fights, so they had to find a way to end the fight in some shape or form without one of them losing. All of those things I have a blast whenever I do rewatch Furious 7, and you can definitely tell when rewatching it over and over again they did have to change some things around due to Paul Walker's passing, but I think the film works pretty well, not just as a Fast and Furious entry, but as a great send-off for Brian's character. The way that he goes off into the sunset to see you again at the very end still hits hard. If they wanted to end the Fast and Furious franchise with that moment, I think it would have been a beautiful send-off, but of course we have many other Fast and Furiouses after this, but I do think just in general this is one of the better sequels. But at number 1, I have Fast 5. This is the sequel where it felt like everything changed for the franchise. Of course, there was a lot of action in the first 4 films, but Fast 5 felt like there was a big shift in it where the entire franchise chose to just embrace the more silly, over-the-top, insane action elements, and I think that is for the better and for the worse, I guess, of the franchise going forward. Still, I love Fast 5 so much. It's so entertaining in all aspects for me. The overall story here is compelling in part thanks to the plethora of fantastic characters and the tension across these different squabbles. Like, seriously, how can I not be so hyped to see The Rock and Vin Diesel fight one another inside of a film? That alone is a huge selling point for this, and I quite like The Rock's inclusion in the Fast and Furious franchise. From their fight to the train heist to the bank vault chase, this was the formula firing on all cylinders and ushered in a new era for where these characters basically go for the rest of the entire franchise, where they're predominantly just super spy superheroes for the rest of the time. But there you have it. That is my ranking of all 11 films in the Fast and Furious franchise. It's been a lot of fun talking about a lot of Fast and Furious and family and all the over-the-top moments that this franchise has had to offer so far. So make sure you share your thoughts down below. How would you rank the Fast and Furious franchise? All the entries from worst to best, because I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of different answers, and that's what makes these rankings so fun. So thank you guys, as always, share the rankings. I always do appreciate it. Be sure to like on the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you update reviews, reactions, rankings, unboxings, and more. The next time, I'll see you guys later.